for the people who want to watch on the YouTubes. Try and make sure everything works as it should. What are my thoughts on salty caramel? I don't know. I've never tried it. I mean, I have a sweet tooth, but I'm very conventional. I like chocolate and other things. I'm not very adventurous when it comes to my tastes, I have to admit. Wow, lots of new people today. Some that don't even have the Ramblings role. Wow. Interesting. 2 new people who don't even have the Ramblings role. Nice. I'm going up in the world. I didn't even have to drag Drac in here. Oh, I'm Fleet of Oceans. I'm the community manager for the Dry Dock, and this is the weekly show I run every week. The weekly Q&A show I run every week. Fleet's Random Ramblings. I've had guests like the Chieftain on here. I've spoken to Drac multiple times. Oh yeah, it all happens here. I try my best to keep it going along, but when I don't have any co-hosts, things do tend to drag slightly. But I'm going to do my best to get... 1 second. How did they get water into the torpedo bulges on USS Texas for D-Day? Did they have a cork in there? No, they have valves. You can flood or deflood torpedo bulges, basically. Oh, something is... Chatfield, there seems to be something wrong with our bloody ships today. I'm still pleased I got to... I'm still pleased that I was the one who got to say that line. Hmm? How did Texas compensate for the list when she aimed? She didn't. The list was part of the aiming. The list was induced to allow them to aim. They calculated the elevation to reach the target, realized they didn't have enough, and so induced a list of however many degrees they needed, or was safe, to get the required elevation. Also, thank you, Jeff, for coming at such short notice.
Hello. I may not be here forever, but we roll.
Oh wow, lots of new people. Yeah, a lot of new people. Nice, you love to see it. You do love to see it. When did underwater torpedo launchers go out of fashion? Basically, the Washington Naval Treaty put paid to them. The last capital ships to have submerged tubes were the Nelsons, I think. And in cruisers, they died off before that. And destroyers never had submerged tubes. No, counterflooding basically takes place. You'll usually have torpedo blisters, or you'll have compartments that can be flooded. What if HMS Invincible replaced There have been multiple HMS Invincibles. Can I...
Please specify.
Yes.
Are you talking of the 74-gun French Invincible captured off Finisterre in 1747? Yeah. I doubt it.
Yes.
But if you did, then a lot worse.
Yeah. Why did the Nelson get them? Basically because battleships carried torpedoes. Iron and steel battleships had carried torpedoes since their inception. Basically because they were seen as weapons to deliver coup de grace kills on vessels that were otherwise mission killed, but that you wanted to ensure went down. Did any ships have 17-inch guns? No. No, they didn't. It's basically down to it's basically down to what you've got, in essence, if you think about it. If a nation builds 15-inch guns, and their ships are armed with 15-inch guns, then you're likely going to want to go to 17 rather than 16. There was a really weird period where the RN went to 16 instead of the 16.5 jump they were going to, because it worked better within the design calculations for the ships they were building. But most of the time, if you're a navy and you're looking to step up your caliber, you're usually looking to step up by 2 inches, usually. At least 1.5. Anything less than that, you're just adding increased weight for not that much increase in firepower. Although it can vary, depending on exactly the gun in question. Like, I'm just gonna put that out there. Like, a 12-inch gun is not a 12-inch gun, is not a 12-inch gun. There have been many different 12-inch guns throughout naval history. The 12-inch gun on the Alaskas is not the 12-inch gun mounted on Dreadnought, is not the 12-inch guns mounted on some of the later British turreted ironclads, is not some of the 12-inch muzzle-loading cannon mounted on some of the earlier ironclads, etc., etc., etc. Your mileage may vary.
And it's not a 12-inch Pelgrim.
Yeah, but I already covered
What's
that.
the question in particular? As well, just for the record. Or
Why do we always assume shells have explosive filler? Because in naval cases, they do. Beyond a certain point. Basically, beyond the point where fuses become reliable and battle ranges increase beyond point-blank range, the solid AP shell as a concept dies within basically every operable navy by about the turn of the 20th century. Basically because ships have gotten larger, they've gotten... Like the solid shot AP round sticks around for quite a while, but it's basically a realization of the fact that, especially as guns get bigger and ships carry less of them, there's a realization that if you're going to hit a ship in an action, you're likely only going to get the one hit. So that one hit needs to do the maximum amount of damage. Now, a 8-inch AP round going through an ironclad is gonna mess up a lot of gubbins and it's gonna do some damage, but an 8-inch round that penetrates and then explodes amid the boiler rooms is going to do considerably more damage to that vessel.
so, when would you roughly say the sort of phase out of just solid shot occurs, roughly?
Basically, when ships start becoming vessels that...
Late 18th century, then.
Yeah, you're basically
Because
looking...
the explosive shot was originally intended for use against wooden ships.
Yeah, you're basically looking at the 1870s. It's basically the entirety of the 1870s is the decade when it phases out. There's no particular year I can pin it on because, again, I don't know exactly. But the 1870s is the period when the battleship, or just the naval vessel in general, grows to such a size that lobbing solid rounds at things are no longer going to be enough to kill a vessel reliably.
Basically, when there's enough ship and enough armor,
Yes,
That just-
basically.
you need something to go boom.
An interesting fact is that solid shot sticks around for a long time, specifically against an ironclad. Because explosive shot's first use is
Well, that's...
against wooden ships.
Well...
It's not until you get the thin-walled and what we today traditionally think of as a shell, do you get AP shells.
Well...
That's explosive shell.
Well... You've grossly oversimplified it for the layman, but yes, you're correct. Basically, explosive shells come in as the ultimate weapon against wooden warships. Then you get... Then you have the existing solid shot that still exists in the form of iron ball. Then you have cone-shaped solid shot that exists. The AP shell, as in a shell designed to pierce armor, basically comes about in the immediate aftermath of the creation of the ironclad. Then you have this weird period in the 1860s where you have solid shot, AP shot, and explosive shell carried by vessels of most major navies. Then solid shot vanishes, and you're left with explosive shell and armor-piercing shell. Then, basically, yep, as Foxo says, when a combination of reliable fuses, the ability for shells to carry gunpowder and be fired, as in with a reliable fuse that's also going to survive penetrating armor, that's when you see explosive shells start to come in. Okay, so I'll move on now.
It's also, I just want to point out a quick thing. It's very much limited, especially by Navy, of your industrial base, because for a long time, making the actual shell of a traditional armor-piercing, we think of a shell, was incredibly hard and incredibly expensive.
It's a pity.
So if you're not expecting to fight heavy armor, you would take solid shot, because it's something that can hurt heavy armor in a pinch. Because building armor-piercing shells is incredibly hard.
I mean,
at that point.
Yes and no. Just to very quickly cap this off, armor-piercing solid shot was a existing invention that evolves into AP. So there is a period. So you'd basically look. I'll come back to this later, but because I do have a bunch of other questions that have been asked that I need to get through.
Okay.
Brackman asks, is there a possibility to add full autoloaders to the 16-inch of the Iowas? They already have as much mechanical assistance for loading the guns as it's physically possible to have. Given the complexities of large guns and the way they have to be loaded, it is very likely impossible to increase the automation any more than it already is, given the capability of the guns to jam and the need for people there to clear the jams. The largest gun that could feasibly be made to be automatically loaded with modern technology would be some form of 12-inch weapon. Because you could
Make it
feasibly
16 to work.
No, you can't make an autoloading 16-inch
I was going to say, I was going to ask us a bit about that. Britain did look at and prototype an auto-loading 16-inch.
That wasn't an auto-loading as you think about it.
Yeah,
That was essentially a revolver setup, which still had the issue of it had a significant reload once you had fired all 8 shots. But it's more of a case of you can automate the loading of a battleship-grade gun, you just can't do it in the way you would want to.
No.
It's very hard, and you don't get it in the same way.
Yeah, basically, if you want, you basically have to sacrifice the ability for anybody to be in that turret in order to get it to work, and you've also got to, because here's the thing, guns jam. Like that happens. Now,
Prince of Wales, you look like a word.
Now, a Des Moines 8-inch turret, like clearing an 8-inch jam on a Des Moines. You know what? Like, get some blokes in there. You can probably do that. Yeah, but no, you could do it. Clearing a jam on a 16-inch autoloader that's fully automatic. Yeah.
Yeah, you've got a ton and a half of shells stuck there, and
and the rest of the
because it's ridiculously high-powered.
All the powder out. Try and get the shell out of the barrel.
And all of them.
I think how ridiculously high-powered the hydraulics are as well in that.
Yeah.
Because what I meant was you can get something that can fire rapidly automatically. It's just not going to be what you think of as an autoloader, like what Des Moines has. It's going to be a glorified revolver where, because the British had a system where if the gun jammed, the entire revolving system would move. Which, mechanical nightmare, but it could unjam itself.
But it's still...
it wasn't an autoloader as you think of an autoloader. It was essentially a burst fire.
It was also just, Jesus Christ, the complexity. But yeah,
admittedly, I'd be very interested to see what a turret like that would look like.
Yeah, the reason that I say that a 12-inch gun is the largest like the Des Moines could afford to have the shell and the brass casing still separate and handle them separately because they could that could be dealt with, and also it was the maximum that could be dealt with by the technology of the time. In order to make a gun jam safe, or to ease the capability at which you would release jams from a auto-loading battleship gun, you're going to have to remove that and instead handle the shell as a single-piece item. To handle the shell as a single-piece item, that's going to impose weight restrictions on your system, which therefore means that the largest feasible gun that could deal with those weight restrictions would probably be a 12-inch weapon. And also, if you're going to do this, you're basically going to have to accept that you're having a single barrel per turret, because that's all the hydraulics and the required mechanisms are going to allow you to have.
That's what I would I'd say I agree for a traditional autoloader, but stuff like the revolving autoloaders, I disagree. Because we know that it was prototyped, and it was 2 guns in a turret that's slightly bigger than a triple. Which isn't very efficient, but it can be done with big guns. It's just, the guns are nightmarishly complex, and have a much shorter life than your traditional naval gun.
Which is basically why the project died, and rightfully so.
Well, no, it died because it was done in the late 40s.
Well, no,
and it's a battleship project in the late 40s.
So, battleships that have low lifespans for their guns are battleships that are useless. Well, not useless, but their utility is greatly diminished. For example, the Yamatos, with their very low lifespan on their 18-inch guns, were forbidden from doing gunnery practice because they didn't want to wear out the barrels of the guns. The Littorios...
Actually, I think that's a false comparison. Yamato, the problem is they couldn't make... Yamato's, the false comparison is they couldn't produce enough barrels to really keep up their rate. The barrels aren't a problem here, because, say if we're going off Britain or the US, they can easily produce enough barrels to go through this. And they have the supply chain to keep them in service.
But the costs
I agree, with nations like Japan would not.
The costs involved...
Yes.
Because
I agree.
if they'd been the will there, they could have paid for it. It would have been expensive, and it's a battleship in the late 40s.
But again, Foxo, it's adding
What do you mean?
expense on top of a project that really needs less expense.
Yeah.
Hence why
Yeah,
it can.
that's what I was saying. It's a battleship project in the late 40s.
I mean, it doesn't matter. Even,
Like, to be fair, I think Fox is not saying it's economically feasible. It's just that it is technically feasible.
You can technically do it,
It's
but why the hell
mechanically
would you?
feasible.
Practical, no. Economically feasible, no. Theoretically and
I remember
mechanically.
correctly, the question was could you do it, not is it feasible?
Well, no, it says, is there any possibility? And I'm saying no, because it's...
Which these are possible. These are possible. It's just unlikely.
These are possible,
Possible, but it's stupid.
Yeah, it's possible, but why would we do this? Also, out of curiosity, Fleet, how long are you planning on going on today? Because you're actually getting a lot of good questions for once.
I don't know.
Like, a lot of good ones.
Well, a lot of new people have shown up for some reason
Might-
today. Anyway,
Which is good. We don't
Okay.
complain.
Yep.
what happens if...
Subtle hint and perhaps move on.
Chris
Yes.
asks, what happens if the Japanese Kantai-Kessen strategy actually worked? Well, this is going to depend entirely on when it works, how it works, and what actually happens as a result of the battle. Could someone take a snap of that? And I'm gonna wait for them to clarify what they want to... Because it basically... I can answer the question, but I need more specific. So could someone just put I'm just gonna put a pin in this quickly, just so that I've got that.
I could tell you what I think would happen.
Could we...
Japan would run into the issue of how do you enforce victory?
Well, yeah, but, like, I'm gonna get into that. Like,
Get a bit of extra If you're still here, Chris, which I hope you're, a bit of extra context, please.
like these are streamed to YouTube, so don't worry.
Oh,
like
somehow all the Yamato, Nagato, Kongo, basically, assuming the entire Japanese battle line manages to come into ambush the US battle line, almost Jutland style. It sounds.
Okay.
Japan wins.
Okay. Let me see.
Japan wins the battle.
They ambush a US fleet.
They're fucked.
A US fleet. Okay, so if it's an ambush, well, that depends. Are the Americans caught completely unawares? When does this take place? Do the US ships have radar? Is it a night action? What's the weather like? Is it foggy? Is it not foggy? Are US carriers in play? Are they not in play? This.
It would help if you specified a time.
1942.
Considering how Guadalcanal happened, You can certainly have some kind of like addendum because in 1942, especially, is a very spicy time period for USN surface forces. Mainly because you have a very high-low of competency throughout the fleet. So you have units like Callahan being an absolute fucking dipshit when it comes to leading USN cruiser action, and then you have the opposite end of Lee being particularly very good. So it's not like you have the sort of 1943, 1944 level of competency that you see in terms of surface actions. However, there should be noted that at least if you ambush quote unquote a U.S. fleet, one of them has particularly good radar, and while its the doctrine for exploiting that kind of capability isn't as written down, I'm sorry, but the Japanese with a handful of radars compared to basically the entire USN fleet, including destroyers being completely equipped with both gunnery fire control radar systems and general surface search radars, means that they can, especially during night battle, they can decide the engagement. And the simple answer would be if
it's 1942 and we're assuming that you've got so the US have North Carolina, Washington, South Dakota. Like, I'm assuming perfect. Like, if we're making things perfect for the IJN, I'm gonna make things as perfect as I can for the USN as well to make it fair.
I'd say it might as well be a sort of almost Jutland style engagement with whatever's around, sort of thing.
Yeah, it's hard to do that because unless you are specifically pinning the USN into a specific position. So the reason why Guadalcanal happened was because you need to support the Marines. Given a space to maneuver, a U.S. Navy task force or an equivalent. Sorry, Arma 3 is messing up my voice. Anyways, a USN battle fleet, or like what you might consider about it doesn't. The question by itself is quite silly. So
welcome to Ramblings.
I say this as an avid Kansai collection player. So point being,
welcome to Ramblings. Go on, Sierra.
But point being, it's hard to really pinpoint a specific course of action by the Japanese, both by the US and the Japanese. I'm certainly by pure like throwaway, if you want to calculate it as that, the Japanese would absolutely win. However, getting them into position is kind of the hard part. It's kind of like saying the answer to winning the 100-meter race in the Olympic is running fast.
Yes, but there's a difference in running fast.
Yeah. It's quite hard to do that in these. What do you think of it? There's a underlying point of ISR, especially with the Japanese, which while it's respectable, it's the information capabilities and as well as the ability to maneuver is quite superior by the USN, which is how they won in the first place in 1942. The engagements in Guadalcanal during the second naval battle of Guadalcanal is basically the Kirishima did not have any information on Washington's position, so they just blasted South Dakota, which was ineffective, but even if it was effective, it doesn't help the fact that there's a battleship, how many slight meters away from the bow it is, so...
Yeah, it's like it doesn't matter that you're pounding that one battleship, because the one you can't see has you in its sights and is about to ruin your day.
What about that battleship's friends?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, especially if once
Go on.
Once you start scaling up the engagement, it becomes a big nightmare, which information clutter can absolutely affect with how dispersed night battles are. There's a particular reason why most night battles are, at least navally, are small scale engagements. Controlling the battle line is very hard to do in the middle of the night, especially if you don't want to reveal your position, which again gives credence towards the ability of
But yes, I think that's
basically, the only way to get a response that I could reliably stand by and say, this is something I'm willing to put my stamp on, is basically to wargame it out, and I don't have the ability to do that, sadly. So we'll just can we at least agree that it could go either way, depending entirely on the exact specifics of the battle? It's not going to win the Japanese the
compositions,
war,
positioning, who's in charge.
you don't simply throw fleet structures at each other because
Yeah.
you fight with you build ships, but you fight with formations.
Exactly.
So knowing what that formation is particularly a lot more important than just hey, there's the period battle capabilities because I'm not gonna. Where's my goddamn book? Okay, I would normally have a book about this because I think
I know what you mean.
Combined Fleet would probably have the best idea of what a Japanese force would look like by 1942, but like 1942 is particularly a long year for both the degradation of IGN and USN capabilities. So,
That's alright, they can... Well, it's important... Well, thing is, Cuban, it's important to finish the question. Because... I record these, they go up... Well, actually, I stream them to my YouTube channel because people asked for a record of them. So, if they ever want to catch it again...
What do you mean they left the chat? He's right there. What do you mean? He's in the audience.
Yep.
I don't know what you mean.
Yeah, Chris is right there.
What?
right there.
What?
Like, he's right there. He's listening to us go on. To be fair, what is an interesting hypothetical, but I need more... Like, we need better ways to do it.
It's a complicated hypothetical.
Yeah. Add it to the list of Fleet Salt history questions he's going to have to answer in this
Oh,
Salt
speaking of old
rambling.
history, you're going to enjoy the next two then.
Oh, boy. Alright,
The next
okay.
two what?
Where are we? Okay, where was I?
It should be Sidious next, I believe.
Darth Sidious asks, assuming the attack on Pearl Harbor went even worse for the battleships, aka... Okay, so an easy way to have this happen is that the Japanese roll all Nat-6s and basically Arizona every single standard class battleship in Pearl Harbor. Because that's the only way to really do that. So, if all the battleships in Pearl Harbor were destroyed or damaged beyond repair, how would the World War II in the Pacific play out? Well, so the US isn't out of standards. They've got, I think, Colorado is in San Diego at the time of Pearl Harbor, isn't she? I think, yeah, Colorado's in San Diego. You've still got the carriers. Fast battleship programs beginning to really work up to steam now. You're looking at the loss of a lot of USN older surface assets, but it's not going to meaningfully impact the war. A lot of those older battle wagons spent a lot of their time doing shore bombardment work, convoy escort work, things that their lack of existence is not going to meaningfully impact the American war effort. The only real difference is going to be there's going to be less battleships at Surigao Strait. There's not going to be none, because there will probably be a Colorado, possibly two, at Surigao Strait, and that's more than enough to just annihilate Fuso and Yamashiro utterly. That is, you know, if they survived whatever's in their way to get to the American battle line, because they were already pretty fucked up by the time they got to the old standards. Honestly, not...
There is an
I
addendum.
suppose the thing is,
What's the addendum?
There is also an addendum.
all it's going to do is it's going to
Same
fuck over the
situation,
Marines.
but all the
Then.
carriers also get detonated because for some reason they're still there as well. Basically, all the ships in Pearl Harbor, carriers included, are kaput.
Okay, well, the US just the US speeds up the independence program. They pull in WASP from...
Probably also the Essex, maybe?
Well, no, the Essex...
The independence comes specifically afterwards, after Pearl Harbor, when they realize that you can't build enough carriers.
Yeah, so that's going to get sped up, possibly expanded. The Essexes are... I don't think it's possible to speed up the Essexes.
Because
more
Essex
than they
itself was
already
a
are.
year after this point, but
You're looking
Right.
at a... You're looking at
Clearly.
a...
No, actually, would it be the Essexes?
Yes, it would
Because
be.
aren't the Essexes done from experience from
No.
the early carrier battles?
No,
No.
they're not. No, they're
no,
not.
because
No,
Essex itself was ordered 1940, so
Or is it the later Essexes that are
it
refined?
might be some of the Lasix had are revised, but at least the first major group were all pre-war
Okay.
sort of
Yeah,
thing for the US.
But yeah, so you're basically looking at a very conservative USN.
Making
for
the
the
Royal Navy
first-
for a carrier?
No, you're looking at a very conservative
Actually, that
USN.
would be interesting, but
Can I? You're looking at a very conservative
Yeah, go on.
USN in the first year, possibly year and a half of the war. They need to rebuild their strength. They've basically got to concede a lot of territory to the IJ, the Imperial Japanese Empire. I don't know if they're going to commit to Coral Sea. Probably not.
Would we see an intensification of US submarine efforts, do you think?
They're already about as intense as it's possible to make it, I'm going to be honest with you, Chief. US subs did an awful lot of
Fair
legwork
enough.
during during the war period.
Well,
Um,
they tried to do a lot of work.
Well, they did. It's just,
The Mark 14s were against them in that.
yeah. But that's basically the only difference. The US will have
I can only imagine.
The US will have to learn the lessons that it learned in carrier operations and damage control that it learned at Coral Sea, Midway, and the various carrier battles around Guadalcanal that enabled it to
Actually,
just
it's a-
decisively dominate the IJN. So there will be, when the first Essexes come around and the first Independences appear, there will be a tough few carrier battles between the USN and IJN, probably in the Central
No,
Pacific.
fleet. I'm forgetting something.
What?
If the USNs are not there, then it's full-on fleet warfare in the Indian Ocean.
I mean-
Actually, but
Because
Not
it was
quite- I wouldn't quite
one
say
of the
full-on, but-
anti-US campaign that stopped the Indian Ocean conflict, wasn't it? That allowed the Royal Navy to return to the Med.
No,
No.
it's the fact that the
Because
Japanese.
if they've knocked out the USN, then it's going to be to fight in the Royal Navy in the Indian Ocean.
No, that's
Yeah, but
not-
the Royal
that's
Navy
not-
is like a cripple at this point because
yes, they'd be already. It feels more like they'll be executing what's left of it there, not
Yeah.
They-
sending
no,
everything.
Yeah,
Indian-
but it's
no,
a case
the
of
Indian-
the Royal Navy proved that they could move a fleet into the Indian Ocean and contest it.
They couldn't
Mm.
contest
It's all
it.
Indian Ocean raids.
They couldn't contest it. It was very much a trip the Japanese up. And to be blunt, the Indian Ocean raid was a raid. The IJN wanted to show up, blow up what they could blow up, and then leave, with no intention of returning. That was the whole point
Yeah, my
of the
point is,
operation.
with the US out of the war in total for a couple of years, would they try to do more there?
No, the IJN...
probably not.
The Imperial...
Remember correctly, the Royal Navy were trying to interdict the Mandalay convoys and stuff.
Imperial Japan has no need to send heavy units and capital assets into that environment.
I think a greater underlying context is that for all intents and purposes, the maneuver aspect on the land part of the Indian Ocean, you can certainly sink like British assets. I don't know what that would do for the war effort though, because most of the supply convoys that we'd be reaching in Raj, India, and going into Burma, which would be resisting the Japanese in the first place, isn't really being touched. I mean, you can certainly make it harder for them, but the movement of divisions from the Raj into Burma to halt the Japanese advance isn't particularly being affected. So
There's no
I
strategic...
was more thinking of
There's no strategic
like interdicting
imperative.
along the actual Indian coast, not the
What?
because the convoys are still coming in from stuff like Madras.
That's such a...
Convoys
that's
still coming in from
such a-
Madras to
that's-
arm India.
That's such a high-risk, low-reward operation that strategically
Well, if the
adds
US
nothing
Navy,
to
by their standards, is out of the war for a bit, and the campaign in Burma's gotten bogged down and the British are reinforcing, then strike the equipment that's reinforcing Burma,
I
which
guess
is mainly
then-
coming in through Madras.
Maybe not to quite go with Fox's point, but what then? Just as one final addendum, assuming the US has been knocked out of the war basically for these 2 years, what does the IJN do with these practically year and a half of freedom of operations?
isolate
Because they're not just going to
Australia.
shove their thumb up their ass.
Isolate
They're gonna
Australia.
probably-
They're not
yeah,
gonna invade
Australia's-
Australia.
Ooh.
They're not going to invade Australia, but they are going to take every single surrounding island. They are going to attempt to cut Australia off from the rest of the Allied powers. That will be their goal.
Yeah. And then what then?
Well,
Well,
Because
I'd
they're
assume
not
a
just
Brit-
going to
I'd
sit
assume-
there with their thumb
I
up their
assume that-
ass.
That is probably when the British would send a fleet on that base because we
Well-
can't let the risk of Australia falling.
The
If it's
problem
completely
is-
isolated, like
The
saying,
problem is, where is the Royal Navy going to find the forces to contest the IJN at the height of its power?
But also, can they afford to let Australia fall?
Well, no,
That's
Australia's
quite
not
a
gonna
morale
fall.
blow.
The thing is,
Yeah,
Australia's
but
not going
we know
to
that
fall.
we know Australia's not going to fall. But think of it from
It's
their
not even
perspective.
that,
then.
They,
It's
If it's-
also Australia is impossible to take,
yeah, we
but
know.
the Northern Island and New Zealand isn't. And the British know in defensive planning that's going to be an absolute nightmare to retake.
I mean, not necessarily. You can just cut out the Japanese reinforcements and let them starve on the island.
Yeah, but it's northern. Remember correctly, New Zealand does have.
What are they going to do? What are they going to get? Wild potatoes?
Yeah, I feel
I mean,
like,
you say that like
IGN
North New
turned
Zealand
to
doesn't have a
farmers.
lot of farmland.
like there's also,
Well,
yeah,
that's
yeah,
exactly
yeah,
one of the
the-
points that Sierra's making. IGA turns into farmers to try and desperately survive.
I'll have you know, this is
But no.
exactly what happened in Burma.
Yeah, it's also a case of we know the IJA is not opposed to enslaving people to farm for them, like
True.
China.
That's true, but it doesn't really supplement an entire garrison force.
yeah.
It's the it's
Isn't
the,
the
it's
North
the,
Island? It's like an
it's the
affront.
whole Spanish question. You know, you can certainly enslave people to do it, but a large garrison force would prove what is the term? I don't have a logistics officer.
Uneconomical?
It would prove
Unsustainable?
sustainable, probably the best answer. But like getting S2 and all that stuff into intra-theater, or try to recreate it. It doesn't help the fact that you're also not going to get like bullets, would probably be a lot more important, especially if you're, I don't know, getting commandoed all the time.
Yep. Yeah,
Well,
like,
why do
like,
people have to keep bringing up that bloody armored transport?
okay.
What?
Like,
They're saying,
if
someone
people-
joking, saying, "Oh, the Bob Semple would save New Zealand from invasion."
Ugh,
I mean,
that kind of- but
if it's fighting Marines that don't have anti-tank weapons, sure.
They definitely have anti-tank weapons.
They-
They have they
Japanese-
commies all the time.
Yeah.
What?
I don't think you even need an anti-tank rifle to stop a Bob Semple.
Well,
It's
no,
got like,
the Japanese
it's
have
got such-
20mm anti-tank rifles.
Yeah.
They have chonky boys.
yeah, but Fleet, I would genuinely argue you don't actually need an anti-tank rifle to go through the Bob Semple's quote-unquote armor.
Anyway, the IGN, like,
Yeah.
for example, Fox, like, I get what you're saying about, you know, not sitting on their thumbs, etc. But that's kind of what the IJN planned to do. They planned to conserve their strength, they wanted to wait for the Unryus to come in, they wanted to wait for Taiho to finish, they wanted to get the first pair of Yamatos in, try and maybe get another Yamato, possibly another pair, in which they will probably get if there's no midway to force that radical redirect of resources towards more flat tops.
It would also help that because you're not going to be using very high intensive like fuel operation or like using a lot of fuel for these operations, so saving fuel would probably be very economical, especially for not having any fuel because the US you're at war with your major fuel supplier. Smile.
The funny thing is, what we might actually see, if the IJN has no major actions or operations to occupy themselves, and the thing they're dealing with most is submarine attack on their merchant fleets, with nothing else to occupy the general staff, we might actually see the IJN maybe put brain cells together about how to mitigate losses to American submarines. I'm not saying it'll
You
lead to
tell-
anything tangible, but I can't see them not doing it if they've got nothing else to think about.
Clearly, the solution is if we strapped
Escort
12
carriers.
centimeter no if we strap 12 centimeter mortars on destroyers instead of having depth charges, we can have a standoff depth charge capability. This is not I keep saying this is not a joke, this is what they did.
Oh my god. But yeah, what?
What do you mean stop with the stupid question?
It's actually a genuinely interesting question to me because I'm playing Cat Tech Collection while thinking about how the fuck do I, as the
I'm not actually
IGN,
sure what which questions are apparently being described as stupid. I have to be honest.
you want me to put a fucking serious question? Hold on.
I mean, these.
I
There
guess
is no
sure.
such. I mean, there is no such thing as a stupid question. Like I attempt to.
No, there
answer
is. There
all
definitely
questions.
is.
There definitely is, Fleet.
I mean, I attempt to answer all questions to the best of my ability. I like
Okay,
to
Flea,
say that
have
I
you
try.
played 2006 Need for Speed Most
Oh
Wanted?
no.
I was
Get to that one at the end, maybe.
I was 5 years old when that game released. Holy shit.
I played it when I was a couple of years old as a kid, and it cemented my love of driving games.
Yeah.
And rock music.
Okay, so
And BMWs.
But after that,
So Chris asks, what if all 7 German battle cruisers showed up with Hipper? I assume that's at Jutland. Then I think, not honestly.
I think 5th Battle Squadron gets a hell of a lot more
Yeah, they get a lot more
weight
matter.
thrown at it.
I'm
Yeah.
I
guessing
don't think.
they'll probably still try and run away, I presume, even
Oh,
faster.
absolutely, yeah.
Like,
Uh,
oh god, that's even more of them. Run away.
Yeah,
Well-
but that's happy. That's happy. That's sad Fifth Battle Fleet noises. Happy Dreadnought noises. Because that's more shit for the actual Grand Fleet to shoot at.
I mean, and then have their fuses fail on it, but yeah, sure.
Yeah, he's got a point there.
Who knows,
But
against the
yeah,
battle cruisers, you might get a bit
honestly,
lucky.
I guess.
honestly- Yeah, honestly, you're not looking at too much change with that. In all honesty, perhaps another British battle cruiser goes kablamo, but that's the only real
Yeah,
change.
the ships that are going to
That's it.
detonate have already detonated. The ships that aren't going to detonate, it's not going to do much difference against.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, Tiger.
Yeah, Tiger's protected from the German 11 inches and shit.
God, what the
where
fuck?
are we?
I think the next one's also
The
Insidious.
effects of HE shells against armor, any useful effects you can exploit. Well, HE shells against armor isn't going to do much, but it's going to do stuff. It's going to do things to stuff that isn't protected by the armor. So a HE shell is going, like, if you detonate a HE shell against a vessel's armored deck, sure, the things under the deck are likely going to be fine, but whatever's above the deck is not going to be fine. Like, for example,
I'd also argue, actually-
like, for example, if a 16-inch HE round detonates on the deck of a battleship right next to one of its secondary mounts, that secondary mount is probably going to have a bad time.
I would actually argue, though, Fleet, there is potentially another effect that could be not quite exploited, but is an awful effect. Imagine high caliber HE round hits a turret face. The crew inside that turret are not going to be happy.
You see, the thing is,
Well,
We know,
battleships-
we do know pressure blast,
battleships and ships in
the
general
blast waves
can be
will
built
affect
big
crew
enough
internally.
that shock is less of an issue than it is to a land target, which is an issue for HE. Because battleship turrets will ring like bells, but they won't kill
But we
everyone
do, I'm
inside,
pretty sure
like
we do
say
have
hitting a
reports, though,
tiger
of
over
people
one.
being stunned
Okay.
of crews being stunned when high caliber HE is landed basically on them, even if they're protected.
Yeah.
It is the
But
sheer
you're not
force,
gonna-
not pressure, will affect them.
Yeah, but you're not going to get the other pressure you'd get, say, against a tank
No,
with a
You don't
6-inch
have
gun.
them. You don't have them expiring, basically because their internal organs have just been splattered. But you'll definitely have problems internally.
When are they gonna add the Type 4 Katsu to War Thunder?
Chris,
Katsu, which one's that? Oh, is that the torpedo carrier?
Chris
Yes.
asks again, why
Good
were
question.
German twins so complicated? They weren't. The funny thing is, German twin mounts and German turrets in general were not complicated. That's the thing. They used side sliding breaches, which are fairly simple to get working. The problem is that they take up a lot of space for a comparative size of
If-
turret. The
Yeah,
turret
if I
ring
remember
for
correctly-
for an equivalent German turret can usually be used to put a triple turret from another navy in its spot. That's why it's not that they were complicated. It's just that they were simple.
It's the
but they
opposite.
were large.
Yeah, they were pretty primitive by gun
I
standards.
will very quickly answer Chris's question
Like
here
Richard.
about the Vasa picture he's posted. No, Chris, that wouldn't work. It is a funny thought though. Cuban Missile asks a very appropriate question given his name. Could the Cuban Missile Crisis have triggered an atomic conflict? Absolutely.
Yes.
It just takes a few different decisions from the parties involved. It absolutely could have escalated. What the result of that conflict
Isn't it literally one guy? Because the Spirits of the Moon almost fired a nuclear torpedo, and if that got fired, it would be a nuclear war. Remember correctly?
Well, it
Yeah.
would be a war.
They'd
whether
probably
it
at least be
was-
shooting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
whether and there would definitely be tactical ordnance involved, but whether they would escalate straight to nuclear conflict is up for debate.
Isn't all conflicts involving nuclear
definitely has-
conflict?
It definitely has
no.
the chance you go nuclear.
I mean, I'm just saying you can have the nuclear. The Cuban Missile Crisis can go nuclear if for some reason a B-47 just drops a nuclear bomb. Therefore, smile. There's no other context is needed. Just drop a nuke, Lamau.
Yeah, Chris asks again, why don't you put 2,000 ball bearings in a 16-inch shell and use it as a giant shotgun? Because naval guns work at a massively decreased range band for a point where that doesn't work.
It's actually
Well,
there's
the
actually-
funny thing is,
Were
there-
smaller
there
guns that
is-
did that.
Well, Well, the thing is, there is actually a 16.25-inch shrapnel shell that was created by the RN for the battleship that mounted for their 16.25-inch guns that some of their later barbette and turreted ironclads carried.
There's
Yes,
actually
a
it's actually-
16.25-inch
Sierra,
shrapnel round.
let's Sierra say something.
So this is actually a proposal that, well as the effectiveness of trying to get HE to work better, quote unquote. This is actually something that I don't think the USN has actually proposed, but it's basically a thought consideration or a thought experiment where, if you know the acronym DPICM or dual purpose improved conventional munitions, a cluster. They were looking at cluster munitions for surface targets, and one of the big things they've seen was basically, well, as the range of targets is particularly more increased, especially against a harder target or hard target penetration, ground fire targets that required DPICM compared to just regular lobbing HE at them was not economical, nor was particularly great, because a big component of naval guns is that you need to be able to engage multiple different targets with potentially one different round. DPICM is particularly only very well suited against, shooting up land targets, which is not particularly effective against, or DPICM isn't particularly effective from a naval gun compared to, at least against something like a light ship or something like that. So the question by itself is kind of a meme, but there is actual context of trying to improve the range of munitions that a ship would have. So normally it would be HE and AP. Later on, this would just be HE only, and trying to get the amount of most usage out of HE would probably be the best question. So alternative munitions for shells do exist in terms of a, use it as a shotgun type of thing, which is what DPICM or just regular ICM would do. But the pros really weren't outweighing the cons of carrying two different types of munitions.
Also, just realised, I think we might have missed a question from earlier.
Did we?
From Chaos Runner asking, would 16-inch high capacity HE shell be equivalent? Be what is known as HESH?
I don't
I'm pretty
know.
sure straight up no.
No, I
because
don't think so.
The high explosive squash head is a very specific thing.
Yes.
But
so-
Sierra, you have any insight?
Off the top of my head, the warhead compared to a regular common heavy common shell, so what we count as an HE shell, you'd still have a slight decrease in terms of warhead count, just because the formation of the HESH shell or the squash head does reduce the total load of the what, or you can call it payload, I suppose, or warhead explosive weight would be. To what extent that would have to be from a design standpoint, because the formation of the HESH is about as useful as a term as AP, where we can get the general characteristics of it, but an AP shell from, let's say, just to take a non-random example, a 75mm Panther gun is going to be slightly different from the AP shell of a 75mm M3 gun.
Yeah.
Well, I thought HESH normally refers to one type of round in particular, which is the high explosive squash head.
Put
Yes.
it this way,
Used in
Dragon.
British service.
It can. It's of. Put it this way, the HESH shell that say the 165 mortar on the Avery fires is very different from the HESH shell that the high velocity 120 fires. 'Cause
Correct.
it has to be to survive at going at that velocity.
But in general, though, I don't think a 16-inch high capacity one is a HESH shell per se, though. In terms of
You
how
need to have
No.
you need to have plastic within it, which is, or like a plasticized shell or a plasticized warhead that would basically be able to compress itself prior to, doing, or there's a reason why the alternative name for HESH is high explosive plasticized.
Yeah.
You need to have the warhead basically squishes itself into a flat cone, or like particularly like a flat cone prior to then just detonating. So
It essentially forms a patty on the armor, and then.
Whereas I thought, 16-inch high capacity still has basically the heavy armor shell at the front.
If I
This-
remember correctly,
just put a nuclear bomb in that goddamn.
If I remember correctly, yeah, the plasticized explosives didn't come in until very late World War II, in general. The early plasticized explosives.
Yeah, so at least within conventional like development, yeah. But HESH was basically something that was existing in the 1940s, just because of how, or like in the 1940 period specifically, just because plastic by itself is particularly not hard to get if you're the Allies.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, considering HESH, the earliest application was with Churchill AVREs using HESH.
I love that.
right?
I love 15th Scottish Infantry Division.
The fact that those were break action mortars never ceases to amuse
I
me.
mean,
Like, you have to get outside the tank to load the gun on the early ones.
It was just a question that I realised we'd accidentally overlooked.
Bishatron asks, Dear Fleet, if the French had not been able to lose their heads during the revolution, ha! Funny, give this man a medal! And the bulk of the French senior admiralty had been kept around, how do you think it would have changed, altered ship development? Nothing. It would have done nothing. Ship development is not guided by admirals in the main, it's guided by naval designers. And if the British Admiralty didn't come up with something revolutionary before, it was actually invented, then the French aren't going to either, just because they have their royalist admirals.
oh my god, it is the 10th anniversary. Shit.
Yeah.
It's also a case of that sort of development was done by shipwrights or captains in the major sale, which is essentially captains going, oh hey, I can do this slightly better this way, and doing it better that way.
Yeah, admirals...
That
Admirals
question
very
posed from
little to
YouTube,
do
by the
with
way,
it.
Fleet.
Oh, we have got a question from YouTube?
Mhm.
Oh.
No, I said, is that one posed from YouTube? Because I can't actually find it. I'm trying to figure out where we are question-wise.
Oh,
Do you want me to ask for questions? I could certainly clutter it if you want.
Rune from YouTube asks, by having a less energetic Meiji Restoration, are you setting them up to be colonized by somebody? So basically, if Japan has a slow
Yes.
restoration, basically, if Japan doesn't modernize rapidly,
Yes.
there will be probably the Russians will come down.
Japan
and
gets China'd
I mean, that probably.
No, they won't get China.
because the Americans are looking at China's market and going, me want. The British are
not-
looking at Japan's market and going, me want. Because
you
more
have to
shit to
particu-
peddle your goods to.
you have to
extortionate
particularly make Meiji and the general Japanese bureaucracy very weak. It's half the reason why China gets colonized in the first place, which is because of a very weak Qing dynasty control over China itself. Having that be effect in Japan is a bit of a question, especially going from Tokugawa to Meiji.
The only way you
I
get
don't
this, the only way you get this sort of slower split up Meiji Restoration is if you don't have a full Meiji Restoration. As in, so you have a Japanese empire, but you also have some very powerful independent clans that are technically subservient to Tokyo, but are in reality just not. And therefore you have
So what do you mean Kyoto at that point? Because the capital gets moved after Meiji.
Well, no,
Yeah,
well,
it's Kyoto.
Well, yeah, but I'm saying there's still a Meiji Restoration. There's still a Japanese empire, but its actual exercising of supreme power is not as we know it. The certain clans still maintain basically full sovereignty over their domains.
It's essentially a feudal system.
That's the only way you get a slower Meiji Restoration. But yes, in that case, if there's multiple different clan leaders for Western powers to deal with, you are going to see clan leaders trading certain things for advantages against their rivals, etc., etc.
Yeah, because I'm not saying it's going to be like China of the same period as Meiji Restoration. It's going to be China in the early trading, European trading, where it gets stuff like Portugal and then the British trading city. Sort of America wants Japan's market open, and the Americans are going to get Japan's market open.
I think
It just depends how.
Could any European power recently colonize Japan in the 19th century? No.
No.
It's again, colonization relies on the fact that you have a very poor centralization within the country, and organized resistance against colonization would be non-existent. That is not happening in Japan.
It depends. Are you talking about colonialization as in what you saw in Africa? Or are you talking about economic colonialism like you saw in China?
I mean, Foxo, it doesn't-
Because
I mean,
getting
Foxo-
monopolies on imported goods and then using that to wring Japan dry, that's something the Western powers could do.
No.
You'd also need to have Japan.
I'm sorry, Foxo. I'm gonna have to disagree with you there. That's not possible. Because if the US couldn't do that to the Empire of Korea and got literally their teeth kicked in when they tried to do that, and they're not going to be able to do that against Japan, which is stronger than Korea.
Yeah, that's through direct military action, which is not going to happen. But I was talking about economic colonialism, as in controlling the market through imports and controlling what they can and can't import. Essentially getting monopolies you use to control the country. Like, that sort of colonialism, A, still happens, and B, is much more insidious and can work in a centralized authority. Because Europe and America still do have a monopoly on industrial goods at this point.
I think the colonization part would be very muted because Japan isn't particularly interested in a lot of imports. So getting it ringed in with a bunch of imports a la King China would probably be kind of hard because for like 200 years they weren't even connected to the global trade market like China was. So they'd be like, okay, cool.
It's a case of once railroads start getting introduced, and you sort of see sort of industrial goods become more common, it's going to be slow and not as drastic, but it'll still be there.
I guess.
Europeans are going to European and sell shit.
At what point is that just
the
like
thing
colonization and
Yeah, well, the thing is, they Foxo, like, I get the point you're trying to make, but if all you're changing is the Europeans are gonna European, they tried to do that anyway in Japan and they failed. Because Japan outcompeted them. And got their own shit up and running faster.
my kind of quotation would be like that. I don't know if that's really considered colonization for the period because that is just called trade. I guess.
I mean, yeah, because it's like several different definitions of colonialism.
Yeah, so that Britain has colonized France because Britain imports English whiskey to France. Therefore, you know.
Well, it would be sort of colonialism if we forced them to buy our cars, and they could buy nothing else but
the
our
EU is a
cars.
form of colonization. Okay, I'm not going there.
Samurai asks...
And then the EU stops you buying everyone except their cars, and you cannot do anything about it, or they'll shoot you.
A10
Or shoot the
you
cars that
can-
are
they
transported.
A10 Braylor, who was the best Tsar of Russia? There wasn't
I answered
one.
this. It's Basil the Second.
Peter the
I
Great.
answered. It's Basil the Second. He had the best Russian soldiers, and he led a good amount of Russian Russian-led expeditions. No one told me that it had to be in Russia itself.
But
He was a great leader of Russian men.
all told, the best Russian Tsar is probably a Tsarina. It's probably because of the last great period of Russian expansionism and the real reforms that finished off what Peter the Great started were under her tutelage. Under her, Russia gained the Black Sea. Russia gained its Black Sea coast. Poland was carved up. Basically, Russia fully entered the modern age as a counterpart to Western Europe, basically, under Catherine the Great.
I'd counter that Peter the Great was better. Because the Great Northern Wars, and they're moving the capital to St. Petersburg and just large-scale modernization and codifying Russian law.
Yeah, but he had. Yeah,
Okay, enforcement of codified laws after him was a bit shit.
Yeah,
but
he had,
Going from non-codified to codified law is a big one.
Yeah, but Foxo, Peter the Great's work had to be finished and fixed after him. Catherine the Great left her successors with a stable Russia that they could build on, rather than something that needed finishing like Peter the Great's halfway house of reforms did.
Yeah, because he took a Russian state that was still running on a feudal system that it had been formed under
Foxo, you mean
into something
feudal.
that was functional.
You mean feudal, right? Not feudal.
Yeah. Yeah, well, given the state, given how the Russian state worked, both worked. Because, like, I'm sorry, but actually, okay, they were imperfect, but going from non-codified laws to codified laws and having a state, instead of just a bunch of nobles that bear allegiance to an emperor, is a massive jump in act.
Yes. Wow, we've
And sort of removing the inherent weakness of Russian state.
Wow, we've nearly.
And he also beat the shit out of the Swedes.
Good ironclad.
But she is an ironclad. I heard when you have an ironclad and your opponent has no ironclad, and shit ironclad's still good.
It's useful for winning a war at sea, but when you're being
problem-
surrounded on the land, you've got bigger problems.
The problem with that is that she's actually really, really bad. She's barely ocean going, and honestly, given the way she's armed, a handy paddle frigate, with a well-trained crew, could probably beat her if she's alone. The IGN realized this and never operated her alone. The Shogunate may not be so smart. What if the Soviets
But it's a
prepared
case
to
of when you're fighting junk equivalents in an inland sea, being ocean going doesn't really matter.
Foxo, that's
Because most of the fight is
Foxo, that's not.
If it's kept
how-
in coastal water,
Foxo,
the
that's
non-ocean
not-
go.
Yeah, Foxo,
non-ocean
that is
goes-
not how that is not the environment that they were looking at during the Restoration Wars in Japan. That is just flat out incorrect.
Oh no, because if I remember correctly, a lot of the Imperial forces were on the southern two islands of Japan. That was their centers of power.
Both sides
And the southern part of Japan,
used steam-powered warships entirely. Their merchant fleets and other transports may have been traditional Japanese junks and other vessels, but nobody was sailing around during that conflict in a vessel that wasn't steam-powered, European-built, or equipped with modern guns.
yeah, but you're missing the point I'm trying to make here.
No, I'm not.
It's that when you're trying to
You have kind of stopped
say-
her being able to make that point every time, please.
yeah, like when you're trying to interdict your opponent's forces getting supplies off their center of power in Kyushu to mainland Japan in shallow, comparatively shallow waters that are close to especially around the northern Kyushu at green water, not being ocean going doesn't matter. And the fact you might stop a shell is better than not stopping an explosive shell at.
Even one of the larger frigates of the wooden paddle or of either paddle or screw variety would be able to beat her. She has a single rifled gun forward as her primary armament and a ram. That is it. She is slow.
She's got 3 guns, bleep. 1 rifled and then what's called 2 70-pounders. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I will also point out
Okay, she's got
that
3
this is the age of explosive shells against wooden ships. Wooden ships do not detest explosive shells.
I feel like you're very
And she
much-
has armor that can stop explosive shells. The ship she's fighting don't.
Foxo, you are aware of what Stonewall looks like, right? Do you know what she is?
See,
I'm asking
Yeah.
you, do you know what she
By
is?
the looks of it, though, like historically, she did actually.
Having a moment here.
We can hear you at least still.
If
Yeah, you were blipping in and out earlier as well, but
sorry, if the Shogunate use her as a lone warship, thinking that, you know, she's an ironclad, she'll be invincible, which is likely what